lively situation. Now, she would say in this situation, she's the victim, Baldoni's the bad guy, and just to lay it out for the
subject of domestic abuse. But it wasn't until it arrived on Book Talk, which is a subset.
8 lawyers, 1 deposition, and a Hollywood star who may have just sabotaged her own case. When Blake Lively walked into that room with Ryan Reynolds by her side and a legal army behind her, no one expected what would happen next. But what leaked from inside those 4 walls, it flipped the narrative upside down and gave Justin Baldoni the very ammunition he needed. And it only gets messier from here. Blake Lively didn't just show up, she staged a legal power play. On the day of her deposition, she arrived at a Manhattan law office flanked by her sister, her best friend, her husband, Ryan Reynolds, and not 3, not 5,
published the swimwear article that is so creepy I couldn't believe what I was reading. This first article I'll talk about is called A Strange Love.
8 attorneys. 8. It felt less like a deposition and more like a presidential security detail. The message was clear. She was ready to fight, and she wanted everyone to see it. But for all that legal muscle, her choice of location raised just as many questions. Instead of appearing at a neutral legal venue, Blake was granted the rare privilege of holding the deposition at her own attorney's office. That's not typical, not even close. It's a special kind of accommodation, one that hints at just how much influence she still holds even while under fire. Judges don't just bend the rules unless someone's pulling strings. Inside that upscale office building on 7th Avenue,
I wondered to myself, Brian, whether Justin's already won that victory and whether, as a result, he's interested.
Everything was set up on Team Blake's terms. But despite the optics, the actual power in the room might have been shifting. Because across the table from her sat Justin Baldoni and his producing partner, Jamie Heath. Both prepared, both reportedly calm. There was no buffer, no screen, just unfiltered eye contact for hours. Can you imagine the tension? You're staring down the person accusing you of misconduct, someone who also happens to be a co-star and a fellow producer, while their legal team surrounds them like a fortress. It sounds like something out of a courtroom drama, but this was real. No lines, no scripts, just accusations, lawyers, and the quiet hum of power dynamics shifting beneath the surface.
Baldoni's lawyer has spoken up and saying he is suing the PR firm and Blake Lively for those leaked text messages.
And for all the effort Blake's team put into controlling the environment, control is exactly what they may have lost. Because despite the carefully chosen setting and the army of legal counsel, the cracks started showing almost immediately. There were whispers, then there were leaks. And what emerged next from that deposition, and whether accidental or calculated, completely reframed the narrative. But before we get into that bombshell, let's take a closer look at what actually happened inside that room. Because some of the things Blake said and the way she said them may end up costing her far more than she expected. For something so tightly guarded, the cracks started showing fast.
Real victim. The real victim is Justin and the others, and it's because they've been wrongfully accused. And ask
what was supposed to be a behind-closed-doors legal session turned into a slow leak of carefully worded filings, vague legal references, and one particularly telling sentence, buried deep inside emotion. It was short, easy to miss, but what it implied, it flipped the narrative. According to a recent court document during her deposition, Blake Lively admitted, under questioning by attorney Brian Friedman, that the only ongoing smear campaign she could personally name was the one launched by Baldoni in response to her own lawsuit. Let that sink in. Not the media frenzy, not the content creators who got pulled into the fire.
Claiming some things about Justin, and the New York Times printed it like a stenographer. And now Justin is through Brian Friedman.
Not the online backlash that her team claimed was coordinated. No, her one concrete example of a smear campaign was Baldoni speaking out to defend himself. That admission may seem small, But in legal strategy, it's a loaded confession because it suggests that her argument isn't about being targeted or harassed, it's about being challenged. And in a courtroom, that doesn't play well, especially when the other side can back up every word with hard receipts. And now, Blake's team is scrambling. Instead of walking that comment back, they've gone on offense, trying to discredit Friedman entirely. Their angle? That he isn't acting as a real attorney, but more like a publicist in disguise.
The judge has just officially thrown Justin Baldoni's entire lawsuit in the garbage. And if you can hear fire trucks in the background.
Because he gave interviews, because he spoke to Megyn Kelly, because he didn't stay in the shadows. They're telling the judge that Friedman should be stripped of attorney-client privilege and that all his communications, emails, calls, even media interactions should be fair game. Essentially, they're accusing him of running a media hit job in legal clothing, a bold claim with a big problem, because that logic cuts both ways. Blake's own legal team has been doing the exact same thing. One of her lawyers gave an interview on CNN. Others have quietly pushed statements to outlets.
One thing that is driving me insane about the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni case is that no one is interrogating where they are getting their anti-Blake information.
There's no clean hands here, and trying to weaponize the media narrative while playing victim to it. That contradiction is starting to show. What's worse, this entire PR-verse lawyer argument feels like a smokescreen, a distraction tactic, because what happened during the deposition, that one slip, that one admission, opened a legal door they never wanted cracked. It changed the framing from harassment to defense, from victimhood to vulnerability. And when your entire case depends on public sympathy, losing the upper hand, even for a moment, can be devastating. The control that Blake projected walking into that room.
First, Blake steals Justin Baldoni's movie, and now she is stealing Brian Friedman's lines. And literally,
it didn't hold, because despite the setting, despite the lawyers, despite the rehearsed calm, she gave Baldoni exactly what he needed. But the worst part for her team was still coming, because right after the deposition, they made a move so careless, so bizarre, it almost looked intentional, as if someone on the inside wanted this case to collapse. And it came in the form of a subpoena, a stack of text messages, and a catastrophic decision that backfired immediately. If Blake Lively's legal strategy looked shaky before, what happened next made it look downright reckless. In what might be the most damaging cell phone of the entire case, her attorneys voluntarily submitted a set of private text messages
with Taylor Swift regarding the film or the lawsuit. The judge denied Lively's motion for protective order,
thinking they would support their argument. Instead, they blew a hole in their own narrative. The messages were tied to their effort to subpoena Rob Sullivan, the editor of It Ends With Us. According to Blake's team, Sullivan was allegedly dodging subpoenas. So, to justify why they needed to compel his testimony, they dropped a string of internal texts between crew members to show how important his input supposedly was. But here's the twist. Those messages didn't prove urgency. They proved control. Specifically, how much creative control Blake Lively was exercising behind the scenes, not just over her own scenes, but over other characters' scenes too.
Reasons why there's no amended complaint? Obviously, I don't know for sure, but I can tell you this, after sleeping...
Including ones involving a teenage version of her character. One producer texted, "That's going to end up being a Blake call. She has approval for that scene." Another chimed in, confused. "Why does she have approval over scenes with young Lily?" The editor, Rob Sullivan, the same guy Blake's team was desperate to get into court, simply replied, "Shaking my head." It was all there in black and white. The very text messages Blake's lawyers submitted showed a production team quietly questioning her dominance, critiquing her creative interference, and hinting at how she leveraged safety concerns to gain more control over what made it into the film.
team are suddenly speaking so passionately about the hard-won rights of the survivor community.
Worse, her team tried to redact names and phone numbers, but the damage was already done. The tone of the conversation made one thing clear. Even the people working on the film felt Blake was overreaching and that her approval rights were not standard. They were strategic. And here's where it gets wild. Justin Baldoni's team didn't even ask for these texts. Blake's lawyers handed them over freely, thinking they would help their case. Instead, they painted a picture of an actress exerting near total control over intimate, emotional, and potentially controversial scenes, all while claiming to be sidelined and silenced. That's not the story her side wanted told.
Things continue to blow up for Blake Lively. So yesterday, she and her attorney, Michael Gottlieb, were accused of witness tampering.
And Baldoni's lawyers wasted no time. They allowed the messages to be entered into the record, with phone numbers redacted, of course. And in doing so, gave the public a rare, unfiltered look at what really happened behind the camera. Even Business Insider picked it up, their headline, "It ends with us," editor complained, shaking my head, about Blake Lively's approval rights for intimate scenes. That's not a flattering look, especially when your legal team is simultaneously arguing that you were being pushed out of the creative process. And that moment marked a turning point, because now even outlets that had once handled Blake's side with kid gloves were starting to ask uncomfortable questions.
Yes. Judge Lyman's making some calls early this morning in Lauren at Court of Random Opinion.
But the fallout didn't end there. The text messages didn't just show internal frustration. They hinted at something deeper, something intentional. A pattern of behavior that Justin Baldoni's team would soon use to suggest that Blake Lively wasn't just difficult to work with. She was orchestrating a quiet takeover. For months, the mainstream media had mostly tiptoed around the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni case. Carefully worded headlines, neutral tones, and heavy reliance on sources close to. But after those text messages hit the public record, the tone shifted. Fast. When Business Insider, a publication that had previously been accused of leaning pro-Blake,
latest on Blake and Justin, Brian Friedman has released a statement. Here it is. The court's decision on the motion to dismiss
published a critical headline. It signaled something deeper. The press wasn't buying the narrative anymore. Suddenly, this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a power struggle, and Blake Lively, once painted as the victim, was now being re-examined as a potential aggressor behind the scenes. The text made it clear. Blake wasn't being sidelined by the production. She was steering it. She had final say on scenes, overruled creative decisions, and even demanded control over scenes involving the younger version of her character. Scenes she wasn't in. That kind of control is rare, even for executive producers. And for someone claiming to have been marginalized, it doesn't exactly add up.
Is Baldoni going to have a career after this? After this is all done, what happens to Baldoni's career? Do you think this hurts him?
But here's where it gets even messier. That public image, the elegant Hollywood star turned reluctant litigant, started to crumble not because of outside attacks, but because of her own legal team's filings. The very people hired to defend her were, one motion at a time, painting a more chaotic, controlling version of Blake than the public had ever seen. And the audience noticed. Comment sections, once filled with sympathy and support, started to shift. More skeptical voices began asking hard questions. And just as quickly, a new pattern emerged. Strangely positive, almost robotic comments popping up under pro-Blake articles. The kind of feedback that doesn't feel natural, or honest.
Emojis. Are you blaming the New York Times for doing that?
I'm blaming the New York Times for participating with.
Across trade sites, blog posts, and legal update videos, the tone of the comment sections flipped, from nuanced debate to heavy-handed cheerleading. Some users even reported seeing the same phrases repeated word for word, posted by different accounts on different platforms. Were bots being used to spin the narrative? Was Blake's PR team trying to manually reset the public mood? It's impossible to say for sure, but the shift was obvious, and the attempt, if it was one, felt desperate. Because no matter how tightly you control the press releases, you can't control leaked texts or depositions or the ripple effects of a story that's no longer just about what happened on set.
I'm shocked that we didn't get more of a reaction from Swifties today. Literally.
But who's still trying to rewrite it. And that ripple effect was about to hit even harder as Baldoni's team prepared to expose not just the creative control Blake tried to seize, but the legal tactics her side used to dig into private data, silence critics, and weaponize subpoenas. As the legal filings piled up, one pattern became impossible to ignore. Blake Lively's team wasn't just going after Justin Baldoni. They were going after anyone who talked about it. Over the course of just a few weeks, Blake's attorneys began issuing a string of subpoenas, not just to film editors or lawyers, but to content creators, journalists,
principles of press freedom and journalistic integrity that outlets such as TMZ relied upon in their own coverage of the
and even YouTubers who had covered the case. Some had only made a few commentary videos. Others, like Andy Signore or Perez Hilton, had built entire segments around it. But now they were being legally dragged into a battle they never signed up for. And it wasn't just about testimony. These subpoenas demanded full access to creators' private data, including banking information, IP addresses, home addresses, phone numbers, and even communications with lawyers or friends. It wasn't discovery, it was intimidation. Blake's legal team claimed it was about uncovering a smear campaign.
Blake Lively's in The Devil Wears Prada too. I like all.
Ladies and gents.
But to anyone watching from the outside, it looked a lot more like a fishing expedition, one designed to scare critics into silence. And it almost worked. Some creators panicked, others lawyered up. A few went quiet altogether. But not all of them backed down. In fact, the blowback was swift. Outrage spread fast, especially as people realized what was at stake. This wasn't just a celebrity trying to protect her image. This was a Hollywood A-lister with money and power, using the legal system to dig into the lives of small creators, simply for having an opinion. It also raised serious questions about digital privacy.
She got her way. Not a surprise here. Hello, my friend. It is Perez, the queen.
Because most people don't realize just how easy it is for someone with the right legal muscle to pull your personal data from platforms like Google, YouTube, or X. Your address, your family's addresses, your browsing habits. All stored, all brokered, all vulnerable. And in Blake's case, those subpoenas were real. Multiple creators reported receiving them. Others, like journalist Sash Flora, whose channel Flossom Talk was directly named, went public about the chilling effect it had. To protect themselves, many turned to services like Delete Me, desperate to scrape their data off the internet. It became more than legal drama. It became a story about survival.
Blake Lively keeps asking for sanctions. Let's take a look. I have not read through these, but I see the word sanction.
About protecting yourself when a celebrity's legal team sees you as a threat. But the irony, for all the effort Blake's side poured into uncovering a coordinated smear effort, they found almost nothing. Just a few known names, no massive conspiracy, no organized defamation, just commentary. Some harsh, some factual, some opinionated, yes, but all protected under free speech. And still, they pushed forward. Even as judges began questioning the value of these subpoenas, even as the public sentiment began to shift, even as critics started asking, was this ever really about justice, or was it about control?
Blake Lively's team tried to strong-arm Taylor Swift into supporting her. According to Justin Baldoni's attorney, that happens to be true.
And speaking of control, that theme would come roaring back, front and center, in a series of text messages and leaks that painted Blake Lively not as a passive victim, but as a strategic force behind the scenes. Because if there was ever doubt about who was pulling the strings, those doubts were about to disappear. In Hollywood, power is everything, but it's also fragile. And Blake Lively, for all her fame and influence, may have pushed hers too far. By the time text messages leaked, it wasn't just clear that she had creative input. It was obvious that she was controlling entire chunks of the film, including scenes that had nothing to do with her performance.
This is 100% exactly what I'm thinking. I'm thinking something happened. He was leading the deposition.
Producers were confused. Editors were frustrated. And everyone on set, it seemed, was walking on eggshells. The messages revealed that she'd claimed she felt unsafe and used that to rewrite the nudity clause in her contract. Not just for herself, but for the younger actress playing her in flashbacks. That move gave her final approval over scenes that didn't even involve her. And from the tone of the texts, no one seemed to agree with it. Honestly, one message read, "It's all about control so she could get to where she'll be next week." Another simply, "Shaking my head." These weren't anonymous rants. These were direct communications between people working on the film, producers, editors, people who wanted the project to succeed.
Are you going to sue Blake Lively too?
Into oblivion, Megan. Wait till you see this lawsuit. It's all going to be based on evidence. It's not going to...
And their frustration was clear. Blake wasn't protecting a character. She was managing the narrative, scene by scene, decision by decision. But that strategy, that behind-the-scenes tightening of the grip, ultimately helped Baldoni. Because while Blake's legal team argued that she was being pushed out of the creative process, the receipts told a different story. One where she wasn't just in the room, she was running it. And that contradiction sat at the core of her case. If she had the power to overrule editors, rewrite scenes, and dictate casting terms, how exactly was she the victim? Baldoni's team didn't miss a beat. They reframed the entire situation, casting Blake not as a collaborator.
We have another crew member that's speaking out against Blake Lively, claiming she took advantage of Justin Baldoni.
But as a hijacker. Someone who used her influence to micromanage a project she didn't create, then played the victim when her grip started slipping. And with every new filing, that narrative gained traction. Even in the public eye, the glamorous image, the beloved actress caught in a studio feud, started to warp into something colder. A figure willing to bend the rules, shift blame, and silence critics to maintain control. It was a classic case of overreach. What was supposed to protect her, her influence, her legal team, her reputation, now threatened to bury her. Because when you go too far in trying to control a story, you sometimes become the villain in it.
The fatal flaw in Blake Lively's case against Justin Baldoni in Wayfair was just discovered.
And as if that wasn't enough, a new front opened in the war. Not against Baldoni, not against the press, but against her own perception of justice. Blake Lively claimed to be fighting back against a smear campaign, but her own deposition suggested something else. If there was one moment in the entire deposition that made people stop and blink, it was this. When Blake Lively was asked directly what smear campaign she was referring to, she didn't mention tabloids. She didn't mention hateful social media threads or coordinated online attacks. Instead, she pointed to Justin Baldoni defending himself. Let that sink in.
Absurd. You and I both know that public figures, many of whom you've defended, including yours truly, have to take...
The so-called campaign, the thing her lawsuit leaned on heavily, wasn't some dark web of rumors or malicious leaks. It was Baldoni's public rebuttal, a handful of interviews, a few media appearances, and a factual presentation of his side of the story. In Blake's eyes, that alone was the attack. But to everyone else, that looked like a basic right to self-defense, especially in an industry where silence is often interpreted as guilt. And what made this claim even stranger was the fact that Blake's team had been doing the same thing, if not more aggressively. Her attorneys had given statements to press, filed highly public subpoenas, and submitted evidence they knew would make headlines.
You guys, I just watched Little Girl Attorney's explanation video, and when I say...
They were orchestrating their own media narrative from day one. So when her lawyers turned around and argued that Brian Friedman, Baldoni's attorney, was acting more like a PR rep than a lawyer, giving interviews, speaking on podcasts, appearing on Megyn Kelly, it didn't land. It just sounded like a deflection. A weak attempt to silence the other side after they'd already told their version of events. And it raised a bigger question. If simply responding to accusations counts as a smear campaign, then what exactly was Blake trying to protect? Her truth or her control of the narrative? This redefinition of smear campaign started to fall apart under scrutiny.
Her castle of caca is crumbling.
Because by her logic, any challenge to her claims, any contradiction, any evidence presented by the opposing side, even legally, could be considered harassment. And that's not how justice works. Worse, this argument fed directly into Baldoni's counterclaims, that this wasn't about right or wrong, but about silencing opposition. That Blake's goal wasn't to win in court, but to exhaust, intimidate, and bury anyone who stood in her way. And now the legal filings were echoing that same pattern. Subpoenas that targeted critics, attempts to strip Friedman of legal protections, claims that basic media rebuttals were personal attacks. What was once framed as a fight for dignity and fairness now looked more like a battle for absolute control.
Now I want to talk about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Blake is suing Justin and other companies and people involved in making of the film.
And while Blake's team seemed committed to the strategy, it was clear to anyone paying attention. The more they tried to control the narrative, the faster it was unraveling. But the story wasn't over. Because while Blake's lawyers were chasing public perception, Justin Baldoni launched a counteroffensive of his own, one that would drag insurance companies into the mix, reveal financial stakes behind the scenes, and hint at a powerful billionaire pulling strings from the shadows. While Blake Lively's legal team was busy chasing creators and trying to reframe public opinion, Justin Baldoni was making a move of his own. And it didn't involve the media. It involved money. Big money.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that evil has once again prevailed because a federal judge has just officially thrown...
In a twist that caught everyone off guard, Baldoni sued his own insurance company, accusing them of refusing to cover his mounting legal bills. On the surface, it looked like a side battle, a financial dispute over liability. But underneath, it was a calculated strike, a way to expose the immense costs of defending yourself against someone with Hollywood clout and seemingly limitless resources. The insurance company's defense? They claim the events tied to the lawsuit occurred before coverage began. Baldoni's counter? That nothing had actually happened, and the allegations were baseless. If he won, they'd be forced to foot the bill. If he lost, he'd be left covering millions out of pocket.
Hey everyone, this is not smart. In response to Blake Lively saying that she...
But here's where things took an even more unexpected turn. He wasn't alone in the fight. Behind Baldoni stood Steve Sarowitz, a billionaire businessman with deep pockets and an even deeper grudge. According to multiple reports, Sarowitz, who had partnered with Baldoni on previous ventures, had allegedly vowed to spend $100 million if necessary to take Blake Lively down. That's not just support, that's a declaration of war. With Sarowitz's resources and Baldoni's legal team now laser-focused on both defense and offense, the balance of power began to shift. Suddenly, Blake wasn't the only one with high-powered lawyers and public influence.
Okay, so I literally don't care what you're doing right now. If you're driving, pull over. If you're at a funeral, go home. Because I have some earth-shattering
Her opponent was no longer just an actor. He was a well-connected filmmaker, backed by a billionaire with a personal stake in the outcome. And let's be clear, this wasn't about ego. For Sarowitz, it was about reputation. For Baldoni, it was survival. If he lost, he wouldn't just pay, he'd be labeled, possibly blacklisted, maybe even erased from projects tied to the fallout. But with Sarowitz at his side, he now had the firepower to fight back. And the irony? The more Blake's team pushed, the more doors they opened. The subpoenas, the text leaks, the deposition details, all of it helped fuel Baldoni's legal and financial arguments.
Hey everybody, I think Justin Baldoni's lawyer Brian Friedman actually just delivered his worst statement to this point regarding the Blake Lively.
And as the filings piled up, it started to look like Blake Lively was no longer just losing the narrative. She was losing allies, credibility, and control. Even the press began hesitating. Outlets that had once covered her with glossy admiration were now hedging their tone, citing both sides more cautiously, quoting court documents that didn't favor her version of events. And with a billionaire bankroll behind the scenes, it became clear this wasn't going away quietly or quickly. But while both sides clashed in courtrooms and headlines, a quieter battle was brewing in the background, one for public perception.
You are about to file a lawsuit against Blake's publicist, Leslie Sloan.
Because even with lawyers and millions in play, it was the audience. The people watching all of this unfold, who would decide who came out clean. And just when it seemed like Blake's team had exhausted every tactic, the internet noticed something odd. The comment sections, the sudden wave of support, the too perfect phrasing. And once again, the question resurfaced. Was this still a legal case or a controlled production? While the legal chaos raged on behind closed doors, something strange was happening out in the open, in places most people wouldn't even notice at first. The comment sections, trade publications that had covered the Blake Lively lawsuit began showing an unusual trend.
Brian Friedman slams Blake Lively's motion to dismiss, and he says that she is abusing the legal system.
Under articles reporting on leaks or court updates, especially the ones that weren't flattering, there was an avalanche of suspiciously positive comments. Overly polished, oddly similar, and almost too quick to appear. At first, it looked like loyal fans defending their favorite actress. But as more stories broke, including those showing Blake's team making serious legal blunders, the positivity didn't waver. If anything, it increased. And that's when people started asking the real question. Was this organic support or digital cleanup? Some users reported seeing repeated phrases, word for word duplicates across multiple platforms.
Things continue to blow up for Blake Lively. So yesterday, she and her attorney Michael Gottlieb were accused of witness tampering and
Others noticed accounts with no posting history suddenly defending Blake with detailed legal arguments. Even longtime followers of entertainment gossip channels began pointing it out. This felt manufactured. And if bots or comment teams were in play, it wouldn't be the first time. Celebrity PR firms have long used digital tactics to influence perception, upvoting favorable replies, flagging criticism, and drowning out negative press with choreographed positivity. It's not illegal, but it's manipulative. And in the middle of a lawsuit this serious, it's also deeply telling. Because while Blake's legal team was trying to control the courtroom, it looked like someone else was trying to control the internet.
As quickly as possible. Our clients are devastated and want to move.
Meanwhile, creators who had been vocal about the case were facing a different kind of pressure. Some reported their videos being mass flagged. Others noticed strange spikes in dislikes or saw their content temporarily hidden in search. It all pointed to a coordinated effort, one designed not just to promote Blake, but to suppress dissent. And here's the kicker. This digital strategy mirrored the legal one, silencing critics through subpoenas, controlling the narrative through selective leaks, accusing the other side of a smear campaign while quietly launching one of their own. To the public, it was starting to feel less like a legal battle and more like a scripted production.
When I did thing, it was intended to force Wayfair to address
a performance where Blake wasn't just the plaintiff, she was the director. But the problem with performances, they depend on the audience believing the illusion. And the audience was starting to wake up. More voices began calling out the inconsistencies. Journalists, creators, and even casual fans started questioning the legal filings, the motives, and, most importantly, the integrity of the team surrounding Blake. Because if you need 8 lawyers, a PR army, digital suppression, and vague legal threats just to tell your side of the story, people start to wonder, is it really your side you're protecting? There's something else entirely. And with each passing week, that question only grew louder.
After Blake made it clear that she did not want Brian Friedman taking her deposition, I just really, really love that Brian...
Because the last section of this saga doesn't play out in courtrooms or headlines. It plays out in whispers, in strategy rooms, in the quiet realization that sometimes the more power you have, the faster it slips through your fingers. From the outside, it all started like a typical Hollywood lawsuit. Big names, vague claims, lawyers making noise. But the deeper it went, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just about contracts, or creative disputes, or even reputation. This was about control. Control over the film, control over the story, control over the public. And now, ironically,
okay, today has been absolutely insane, but while I was going live on my show today, over on YouTube,
that need for control is what's unraveling Blake Lively's case from the inside out. Because every time her team tried to silence someone, another voice spoke up. Every time they filed something to bury the truth, it leaked louder. And every time they tried to make Justin Baldoni look like the villain, the receipts told a different story. One where he was calm, strategic, and increasingly backed by people with a lot more to lose. Blake's efforts to protect herself, legally, digitally, even emotionally, may have crossed a line. The subpoenas, the PR spin, the behind-the-scenes power moves, at some point it stopped looking like damage control.
Almost immediately following the court's order, Mr. Friedman began violating it and has continued to expose the public and the jury.
And started looking like a takedown attempt gone wrong. And in all that noise, the real question got lost. If you need to rewrite the rules to win, did you ever really have a case to begin with? In the end, the courtroom will decide the legal outcome, but the public is already deciding the narrative. And that's the part no lawyer, no billionaire, no bot farm can truly control. Because once the truth starts leaking, it doesn't stop.